Hey friends, it's Unicorn. If you're watching this video on the uploading day, it's Valentine's Day. If it's not, no worries, because as some random wisdom people used to say, every day can be Valentine's Day if you want to. So fittingly, today I want to bring you 10 novels that will tear our heart apart. I know, evil. I do find myself a little bit creepy coming up with a video idea like this, but as some of you guys may know that I love reading about a dark and heavy topic books, I find them oddly satisfying and rewarding. Because it's Valentine's Day we're talking about here, the first 5 books are dealt directly with romantic relationships with a twist, and the following 5 books are dealt not directly with romantic relationships, but with relationships with our family and friends and sometimes with ourselves, all kind of important and beautiful relationships in our lives. But as the title of the video suggested, these are not the most delightful books to read about. If you prefer to read about happy books, I made a video years ago about books to cheer us up. I'll link it down below. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the books. Firstly, please allow me to start with Normal People by Sally Rooney. I know you're like, this book doesn't need your recommendation, but this is by far the saddest book I've ever read. I remember when I was reading this book, I feel like my heart was sliced into pieces, seasoned with salt and chili powder, and fried first and grilled for a very long time. If you need a refresh, this book set in Ireland follows 2 young friends, Connell and Marianne, from when they were in high school until to about after college. In high school, Connell is a popular and well-adjusted boy, and Marianne is smart, quiet, and didn't really fit in. Both of them are super private, and they connected in a spiritual level. However, they pretend to not know each other in high school. When it comes to university, the structure kind of switched. Marianne was able to social with ease and was very popular, and Connell find himself in a corner. As readers following their crossing lives all the time and witness when they're growing up and looking for the meaning of life. The book tackles on so many things that in our teenage and new adult life that we're desperately trying to figure out. Testing of boundaries of intimacy, the uncertainty of life, and also the insecurity of their relationships because they're just in this so insecure stage of life was all so on point. I also loved the things that the characters talks about and care about in the book. Someone may say that they are broad and impractical, but I feel like that's so accurate because they are at a stage of life where people consider impractical things as the most important things in their lives. Maybe it's just me, but I just loved this book. Next book is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is one of my favorite reads of last year. This book follows Vanessa in 2 timelines. The first one is when she's 15 in the year of 2000. That she slowly stepped into the trap of an abused relationship with her teacher, who is a 42-year-old man at that time. In a relationship, she's abused and gaslighted, and she had to interpret the whole situation in a twisting way in order to accept herself. Second timeline is 2017, when she's an adult, and the teacher was accused of sexually assault some of her schoolmates, and the schoolmates reached out to her and expecting her to speak up. Or she was forced on reflecting the relationship with her teacher and faced the lie that she kept telling herself over the years. But it's so difficult because how can she just face the truth and denying all the things that she believed in her entire life? I love this book so much, and I think it's such an accurate portrait of how a abused relationship can be and how powerless teenage can be when it comes to things like this. The things we discovered with Vanessa together are so dark and unimaginable, and the psychological description in this book are so brilliant. And also, I think this book is very important because sometimes we fail to recognize that how hard it is for victims like Vanessa to share even a little bit of their stories. Then I have to mention a book in Chinese that is similar to My Dark Vanessa but somehow more tragic. It's called 房思琪的初恋乐园, Fang Siqi's First Love Paradise by Lin Yihan. This book doesn't have an English translation yet, and I have to ask why every time I mention this book on my channel. Just publishers, please translate it. The book is also about a twisting teacher and student relationship. The protagonist, Fang Siqi, is a 13-year-old girl who loves literature. She took extra lessons from a teacher that lived in her apartment building. In her mind, the teacher was a mentor and a role model in literature, only that the teacher's goal is to manipulate her and eventually rape her. Afterwards, Fang Siqi didn't have the ability to digest what happened, so she had to lie to herself in order to accept the reality. The very sad and tragic thing about this book is that the book is based on the author's experience, so it's very much a autobiography novel. And after it's published, the author died due to years and years of depression. But the person who the teacher was based on was still able to teach for quite some time after the publishing of this book. Besides the subject matter, the book is beautifully written. The protagonist was fond of literature and an expert of Chinese literature, so was the author. I haven't read any books in Chinese that is as beautifully written as this book. It also referenced a lot of poems that the author liked and also other books. It was such a wonderful reading experience. Next book is a Chinese modern classic. It's called 半生缘, Half a Lifelong Romance by Eileen Chang, Zhang Eileen. This is a classic heartbroken story set in the earlier 20th century in China between two cities, Shanghai and Nanjing. It talks about the relationship between two friends, Manzhen and Shijun, who's longing for each other, but there's always something between them. The book talks about how little we can control our lives, especially in such a turbulent era when people are separated by backgrounds and classes. It has the classic desolate feelings of Eileen Chang's writing, and the language is just so wonderful. I loved this book when I was reading it, but that was years ago when I was reading it as a purely love story. But I really want to reread it now because recalling the story, I can see so much more beyond the surface romance. I can see that this book is actually a feminist story that has a lot of things reflecting on women's situation that are relatable even in today's life. And this book was also adapted into a movie that I really liked. I'll leave the link down below. Fifth book is also a modern classic. It's The Painted Veil by William Somerset Maugham. This is a sad story in many different angles. The story was set in England and Hong Kong in the 1920s during the cholera epidemic. Blurb says it's a story about a beautiful but love-starved Katie Fang, which is apparently very true, but it's also a story about how people react to heartbreaks. What's more about this book is that it also showed us how much it takes for a person to grow and to really know themselves, to know what they really need in life, and to know the people around them. I also like the contrast between the very Western characters and the very Eastern background in Hong Kong, so that I enjoy to see how the characters adapt to their life in the foreign land. And then I have 5 books that are not directly dealt with romance. Some of them do have romance elements in them, but I tend to categorize them in different genres. The first one here is The Prettiest Stars by Carter Sickels. This is a historical fiction set in 1986 during the height of the AIDS epidemic in America. The protagonist, Brian, is a 24-year-old young man who returned to home in Ohio from New York City, where he was able to live openly and freely. His boyfriend and many other friends are died from AIDS already, and he himself is also dying, so he wanted to be with family. The book talks about townspeople's reaction to Brian's return and his family's. Due to the limited information people had and all the misunderstandings, we can imagine how horribly he was treated by all the people. This book led us to see the devastating results of ignorance and arrogance, and how people can be driven by the fear that shouldn't be exist and react unreasonably and be so blind. It's also a very fitting book to read now during a pandemic and reflect on how our society is doing now. The book is not only here because of the subject matter, it's also a exquisite story about the character's development and all the emotions Brian and his family went through. And the ending of this book is just so unforgettable and so well done. Next, I want to talk about 活着 To Live by Yu Hua, translated by Michael Barry. This is a book that I read and loved many years ago, and it's another Chinese modern classic. And the protagonist Fu Guo is born in a very rich family, but he had a gambling habit, so he soon drained all his family fortune, and a series of unfortunate events happened to him and his family, which transformed him from a spoiled son of a landlord to a kind-hearted peasant. As we see him become this honest farmer, we also witness all the horrible things he experienced during the Civil War and the hardship during Cultural Revolution. A very classic picture this book painted is about Fu Gui, who's standing on the field with his ox, the only being that accompanies him through time and reflecting on his life events. This is a searing tale and also an emotional ride. With a very complicated dynamic, the book showed us how much strength people need to get through all the difficulties and how much power had just in order to live. And I have a book I read and loved last year, but I never got the chance to talk about it. It's The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi. At the beginning of the book, Vivek Oji died. The body was dropped in the front door, naked and brutally killed. No one knows how, when, who did it, and these questions tortured Oji's mom and also the rest of the family. This novel will follow two characters from different generations, Vivek Oji's mom and cousin. From their investigation, we slowly get to know who Vivek Oji is and all the events that led to the death. The book has so many shattered stories. It's about Vivek's mom's journey to relearn her child and to rediscover all the secrets that her child kept from her. Also about the cousin who's finally come to terms with himself and finally started to accept who he is. And of course, it's a book about Vivek Oji that we learned about the truth behind the tragic death and also all the lives that were impacted and touched because of Oji. This is also a mystery novel, so I can't say too much here, but I just love the writing of the book and I love how much I learned about the culture from this book. And then I have a book here that is not as sad, but I just can't get over the sorrowness that the book brought me so many years ago, and it's The Strays by Emily Bitto. This is a historical fiction set in Australia. It's talking about two young friends who inevitably drift apart during time. Lily and Eva met in school when they were small. Lily is from an average family, and Eva is the daughter of an infamous painter. Eva's life fascinates Lily because it led Lily to see a lot of things that she wouldn't dare to imagine. As their friendship grows, Lily becomes a very important part of Eva's family, but it's all kind of utopian after all. Now we're following Lily's point of view when she is much older and reflecting all the events in her youth and the things that led to the separation of two friends. This is not an emotional drama in any terms, it's kind of a slow burn, but I just cannot forget the sadness in the tone of writing. I think this novel will be very impactful if you have had a friend who you thought you would share your entire world with, but you just can't defeat the time and distance between you two and finally drifted apart. I had one of those friends before, therefore maybe I love this book an extra amount because of that, but despite that, I think this book is a very beautiful story about friendship. The last book on this list is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This is another very popular book. I feel like we started with one, so might as well end it with one. Lydia's dad is the first sentence in this book, and then we're introduced to her family, which is a Chinese-American family with an American mom and a Chinese dad set in 1970s. And then we're set on a journey to figure out why Lydia died and uncover the dynamic in the family, the different stories of each characters, and more importantly, their relationship with Lydia. This is a book that examines hopes and expectations that passed on in the family, especially in such a family who's facing pressure from both inside and outside due to the historical background. We see the family burden that passed down to Lydia's generation from her parents' generations, and also how race and culture plays a different role to different family members due to their background, especially from the mom and dad who's coming from very different cultures. This is a very uncomfortable read, but also a very important one because all the phenomena that happen in the book are still widely relatable and are widely discussed until today. And that's all the books in today's video. I hope you find this book somehow interesting. Please let me know if you have any thoughts regarding to these books, or do you have any recommendations for books that are similar to these books, or even nonfiction will do. I would love to hear about them. And don't forget to say hi in the comment section down below. Thumbs up to this video if you liked it. I wish you happy reading, stay healthy. I'll see you in my next bookish video. Bye!